The fire raged unchecked through surrounding neighborhoods. Others watched from rooftops on Telegraph Hill, Russian Hill, and Nob Hill. By this time, it seemed to many there was nothing one could do but watch.
That night, we went up on top of the hill, my mother and I, and the whole city was burning. All south of Market and all along the waterfront was going. And she said to me, well, Will, you'll now be a pioneer of New San Francisco.
By 10 p.m., 250 city blocks had gone up in flame. South of Market was gone. The financial district was gone. Chinatown and the Barbary Coast would burn in the night. Reports began to reach the outside world, but it would take days before anyone, including the people who lived through it, could fully grasp what was happening. The headlines were part fact and part fiction. At dawn on April 19th, 24 hours after the earthquake, people who had lost their homes gathered in the streets. They seemed shell-shocked, unwilling or unable to go any further. Fortunes, factories, homes had all been swept away. Word got around that boats were taking people across the bay, and thousands began the long trek down Market Street to the ferry building.
My parents were able to hire a wagon, and we told them we wanted to go to the waterfront to take a boat over to Richmond. And the people demanded $20 for the ride, and that was quite a sum of money in those days, because the average Chinese earn about $15 a month.
Others dragged trunks for miles, or carried what they could on their backs. Messages to lost friends and relatives were chalked on the sides of buildings. Another reporter joined a stream of refugees. He wrote, "The street seemed dead. Not recently dead, but as if buried by some cataclysm of long ago and then dug out of the lava. Everywhere there was smoke, a contortion of stone, and a great silence." At the end of the long march, when people finally got to the ferry building, they were told they could only take what they could carry in their arms. By midday on April 19th, 250,000 were homeless. Over 3,000 were dead. But that was only the beginning. The city would burn for another 2 days. When the fire had burned itself out, William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate, arrived in what was left of San Francisco. He wrote,
"The hills rolled to the seas as bare as when the pioneers landed in '49. But now they are a blackened waste. North to the bay, west to the Mission, nothing but ruins. The wholesale district is destroyed, the manufacturing district, the financial district, and the waterfront section, all destroyed." I will not attempt any description of this scene. I do not believe that any words of mine could convey the slightest comprehension of the wreck and ruin.
Took us out, took the whole hill out. We had nothing up there. All I could remember, when my mother took me up after the fire, we saw where we lived. All that was left was the foundation, the concrete foundation. We found one thing, and that was a little sewing machine that you turned around by hand for a little girl. My sister had it, and that was in the ruins. That's about all we saved out of that.
One must free the mind of the idea that there has been a fire in San Francisco, and must realize that there has been a fire of San Francisco. The whole city has gone up in one mighty blaze. The calamity seems overwhelming, and yet the people are not overwhelmed. Everything has been destroyed except that indomitable American pluck. In a month, there will be the beginning of a new and splendid city. In 3 years, it will be built and busy.
Finding loved ones would take days. Hundreds prayed they would not find them on the lists of the coroner, who now supervised the exhuming of hastily buried corpses in Portsmouth Square. Food was short at first. Men scavenged for canned goods in the debris. Drinking water was a precious commodity. But even before the fire had burned out, supplies began to flood into the city. Military garrisons from Portland and Seattle sent 900,000 rations. A relief train arrived from Los Angeles. Hearst mobilized the resources of his newspapers and dispatched 12 trains from New York. Congress appropriated $1 million. Pledges of money came from cities, towns, and organizations all over the country. Soup kitchens cropped up amid the ruins, and everyone waited in lines.
My father and I, many a time, stood in the line from early morning until maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And when you get to the counter where they were handing it out, well, sorry, it's all gone. So then you had to wait until the next day to get in line. And that's the way it went.
Standing in bread lines, meat lines, soup lines, any kind of a line became the central activity of life. Everyone had to do it. Soldiers made sure nobody cheated. Some people joked about it. Others didn't think it was so funny. A few were inspired to write poetry.
It ain't such a terrible long time ago that Mrs. Van Bergen and me, though living nearby to each other, you know, was strangers for all you could see. For she had a grand house and horses to drive, and a wee rented cottage was mine. But now we need rations to keep us alive, and we're standing together in line.
If you weren't standing in line, you were probably digging out, whether you liked it or not.
My father was standing on the curb right in front of the tents, and an army man came along, and my father was very courteous, and he said, "Good morning, Captain." And he says, "You working?" My father says, "No, sir." And he says, "Come with me."
Anybody they caught walking the streets was handed a shovel and followed a truck for 5 or 6 blocks until they picked up another guy. And then they let the last guy loose, and that's the way it went on until they worked till 6 o'clock maybe.
Within a week of the end of the fire, over 200,000 people found shelter in camps that had sprung up in the parks and squares of the city. Newspapers in San Francisco portrayed the life of the camps as something downright heroic. Here again was frontier man and woman, reduced to the bare necessities of life, toughing it out like the stalwart pioneers of '49.
we were cooking out in the front of the tents, you know, and the sand would blow into the beans, and it was an awful mess. The grit of that sand and the beans, I could never look a bean in the face for many years after that.
While people started life over again in the camps, the city, its government, utilities, and business struggled to get back on its feet. City Hall was devastated. The quake had exposed fake marble columns, evidence of underhanded deals with the contractors who had built it, at the inflated cost of $7 million. Mayor Schmitz and his paint-eating cronies would eventually be deposed. But for the time being, he still enjoyed an immense popularity, and it seemed that the quake had shocked him into his best behavior. With a grim memory of the ham and eggs fire, the mayor ordered everyone who still had a home to cook on the curb until inspectors could check their chimneys. Another big problem was sanitation. With sewers blocked, epidemics were feared. Rats flushed from the sewers could carry the bubonic plague.
And there's one thing my mother didn't like, it was rats. We had 5 ash cans for all our refugees. When we come back at noontime for lunch, I'd inspect the ash cans without the covers to see if a rat had gotten in one. And of course, if he got in one, he couldn't get out. My dog Sandy, a fox terrier, would be standing there with his tail wagging, and if there was a rat in any of the cans, I'd tip it over and the rat would jump out and Sandy would kill him. So I would take the rat over this teenager, and he'd take it, I guess, down to the emergency hospital, and the city was paying a bounty on all the dead rats. And what he'd do is he'd give us a couple of pieces of candy, and he'd collect the bounty.
The main post office survived. Mail service resumed almost immediately. Letters were accepted without stamps or envelopes. Messages were scrawled on any available scrap of paper saying, "All safe, although lost all," and "Everything ruined, but don't worry, government is looking out." Insurance companies, having lost their records in the fire, set up a central bureau to sort out $170 million in claims. Businessmen waited for weeks for their safes to cool before discovering what remained. It was said that in many places the debris was not even allowed to cool, and bricks were pitched from lots when still as warm as muffins. Volunteers on the cleanup crews took up the refrain, "In the damnedest, finest ruins, I'd rather be a brick than live anywhere else but San Francisco." The great cleanup had begun. Thousands of standing walls were torn down. An estimated 6.5 billion bricks were carted away or cleaned of mortar to be reused in new buildings. The demolition of the gutted Palace Hotel cost $90,000. For the whole city, just hauling away the mess and dumping it in the bay would cost $20 million. Railroad tracks were laid down streets all over town for debris trains. You were lucky if tracks ran near your property. If not, you'd swap your kingdom for a horse. In the first 18 months of Reconstruction, 15,000 horses died in harness. Contractors figured into their costs the value of the animals they knew they would have to work to death. Work on the streetcar system began at once. The United Railroad replaced cable systems with overhead wires for new electric trolleys. Only 10 days after the quake, Mayor Schmitz inaugurated service on the first line. People cheered as the car passed. Some forgot to move until almost too late. Thousands of laborers worked on restoring the lines. Within a few weeks, 225 miles of track were up and running. Newspapers proclaimed the rebirth of the city. A newspaper reporter asserted that
the business of San Francisco has not been destroyed, merely the business equipment. If there is a businessman in this city who is not perfecting his plan for resuming at the old stand, or as near as possible thereto, the Chronicle has not heard of him. It's a free state, everyone beginning over again, rich and poor alike. The chief of police sits in the window of a corner grocery, and the relief committee is working 24 hours a day from the showroom of a vegetable grocer. Cooking their dinners in the streets may be seen girls who were educated at Stanford, Berkeley, Vassar, and Bryn Mawr. The loss of life is small. The loss of social position is colossal. Down to the elements now, nothing counts but human love. Humanity is on the flat, and everyone is on the level.
within 6 months, the ranks of the building trades in the city doubled from 20,000 to 40,000. Working men and their families arrived from all over the nation. Popular postcards of the day featured the brick cleaner, the carpenter, and the steel girder man as the new heroes of San Francisco. A carpenter could make a fat wage of $4 a day. In New York City, lawyers were only making $1.50. The Chinese returned from segregated camps to survey what was once their home. In the next 3 years, Chinatown would be rebuilt, mostly by the Chinese themselves.
My father was so grateful that the family was intact and that we had suffered no great loss. And so he decided to follow the American custom of having a Thanksgiving dinner. And so he bought a turkey, a 20-pound turkey, and a portable oven, and roasted the turkey. And that caused quite a commotion among the people living in the tenement house because they never heard of such a thing. And but my father said, well, the American custom is to have a Thanksgiving celebration, and that's what we're doing.
$28,000 buildings had been destroyed. 3 years later, they would be replaced by 20,500 new ones. A completely new city rose up on the edge of the bay. The people of San Francisco shared a sense of triumph. They also shared a desire to erase the memory of the disaster and reassure themselves and the rest of the world that the new city was somehow invincible. They fought for and won the right to host the World's Fair of 1915. February 20th was opening day. Come down into the streets, instructed the organizers. We want everybody. We will walk, everyone without distinction. After years of waiting, the hour has come for San Francisco to come into her own. We are going out there to open our exposition. When the crowd entered the gates, it fell strangely silent. There was a benediction. To the city of St. Francis by the Western Sea, give a hope and a faith that know not failure. Even the city's Chinese were invited. They staged a grand parade through the streets to the fair. The Italians staged their own event celebrating Columbus, the discoverer of America, and the great Italian patriot Garibaldi. Fatty Arbuckle and Mabel Normand, king and queen of the silent comedy, were welcomed by a new mayor on the steps of the half-finished City Hall, a symbol of reformed city government. The fair itself was designed to represent the complete development of human civilization up to present time. The wonders of modern technology were particularly reassuring. They seemed to demonstrate a triumph of man over the forces of nature. The World's Fair's own fire department was supplied with the most modern equipment. The last of the old horse-drawn steamers had just been replaced the year before. Thanks to the new motorized fire trucks and the installation of high-pressure water mains in the city, people were confident that destruction by fire could never happen again. Tens of thousands came to San Francisco, in spite of the lingering worry that the city remained on shaky ground. In the end, there were no guarantees that the city was invincible. There was only the will and the example of the people themselves. Here was manifest an indomitable and impetuous spirit that, in the wake of disaster, had built an entire city and a World's Fair from the ground up.
It was fairyland. It was just like fairyland to me.
Those were the glorious years when I was 15, and it was just beautiful.
That was one of the most wonderful fairs I'll ever have anywhere.
Oh, that place? That's a nice place. And the only words that I could use, it was magnificent.
We'll move to the latter portion of this century now. For America's Century, tonight, how America became one of the great debtor nations of the world. Blowing the Fortune, 1963 to 1989 is next tonight, followed by JFK, remembered tonight at 11 o'clock. Next Tuesday in American Experience, a profile of the preacher and a politician from Harlem, Adam Clayton Powell, 9 o'clock next Tuesday night. And tonight's American Experience on the San Francisco earthquake will be shown again Monday evening at 11 o'clock. By the way, KQED is involved in an earthquake relief concert that will be broadcast from Watsonville, Oakland, and the Cow Palace this Sunday, noon to midnight, simulcast with KQED FM 88.5.